Hi everyone, welcome to part 1 of 2 of an introduction to APUS history. In this video, we'll cover the course contents, a basic explanation of the test format, and some study strategies that you can use. Before we begin, I would like to announce that this video review will be based off this AMSCO APUSH 4th edition textbook by John Newman and John Smallbach, published in 2022. Your teacher may be using different sources, and this may introduce some information that's not in these textbooks and therefore not in this review. These videos are also geared toward review and will cover the bigger events or concepts throughout the course. On the screen right now is what is included in the APUSH exam, and this is directly from College Board themselves. Each unit covers a set of years, and some units appear more frequently on the exam than others. Feel free to pause the screen if needed and read what is covered on the exam. Moving on, here's a short introduction to the exam format. There are 3 parts and 4 total components, but 2 of them are very similar and they're commonly grouped together. The first section is the multiple choice questions. Called MCQ for short, they are paired with some sort of stimulus, and students have 2 to 3 questions to answer that are grouped with this stimulus. Sometimes one of the questions may have an answer that's not explicitly mentioned in the stimulus, which means you can't rely 100% on the source when answering questions, and you'll need to use your memory sometimes to find the answers. The short answer question, or the SAQ, has 3 parts, Part A, Part B, and Part C, per question. So if we want to get technical, there are 9 parts that you must answer in total. 2 of the 3 questions that students need to answer have stimuli, and similar to the MCQ, some answers might not be stated directly in the stimulus. In the last question, you must use 100% of your brain power because there is no stimulus provided. There are 2 questions like this, but you have to pick one of the 2 to answer. Answering both has no benefit to you because the AP graders will only grade one of the 2 questions if you do decide to answer both, and it will just simply waste your time because you only have 40 minutes to answer all these questions anyway. Lastly, the document-based question, or the DBQ, is a long essay, and 7 documents will be given for you to use as evidence. It's tested at the same time as the long essay question, or the LEQ, which means you have to divide the entire 1 hour 40-minute time period wisely to complete both of the essays. It's recommended that 1 hour goes to the DBQ and 40 minutes go to the LEQ, but you can divide it however you want to make it work for you. The LEQ has the same concept as the DBQ. It's a long essay, but unlike the DBQ, there are no documents given to you, which means it's similar to the SAQ in the regard that you must use your memory to answer the prompt. Also like the SAQ, the LEQ has 2 prompts to pick from, but you have to pick only 1 prompt. You won't have time to write both LEQ prompts and the DBQ prompt and finish all of them. It's basically impossible to do in such a short period of time. It's more important to write what you can well rather than trying to complete everything and overachieve and potentially get a lower score. Next, we'll cover some study strategies for the course. You might have heard of some of these, and these aren't all the strategy or the only strategies that you can use for APUSH. There are plenty of other strategies out there, but these 4 are what I personally used and they worked well for me. Different methods work for different people, so you might need to explore other options, and that's okay. That's completely normal. Firstly, we have Cornell notes. You might be familiar with these because these are used for so many classes. It's popular because it's so organized and each column has its own job. You can whip these notes out in class while your teacher is lecturing and take notes in the note-taking column, and then you can add the cue column and the summary column at another time, like later that night. What I personally did with Cornell notes is I took notes on the topic that my teacher would teach before class a couple days in advance, and then attend class knowing the material that my teacher would cover. And for some of you, you might know that this is actually another study method, and it's called priming. I would like to add that in the Q column, for APUSH or any history class specifically, you might want to note important people, important dates, important places, or important ideas or concepts. And you can color code these. Like for example, you can make the people red, The place is blue, the ID is purple, and the date's green. This is what I did. So when I looked at my notes, I could just look at the Q column and based off the color, I would know what I was looking at without even reading what the Q column said. You can customize it to make it work for you. Next is timelines, and these are pretty simple and straightforward. Most of you guys have worked with a timeline before sometime in your education, and it's basically just matching events to a year or to a time period. I didn't use timelines much personally, I think I used them one or twice, but I know of people who love timelines because it's really easy to visualize when something started and when something ended. And this is mostly used for events that had a distinct start and end. Moving on, we have mind maps. I love mind maps because it's so easy to see where and how things connect to each other. It's also easier to see which topics lead to bigger topics, and which bigger topics lead to even bigger topics, and so on and so forth. And it forces you to condense the information because you're fitting so much information on one chunk of paper. I used mind maps to review for the APUSH exam, so I made these all in April, March, and I made a mind map per unit, so I made 9 mind maps total, but I think these are very good to use before a unit test as well. If you decide to make a mind map for review, I would recommend doing it one time without your notes, and then use your notes and then a different colored pen to fill in or to fix any mistakes that you made while making the mind map. Finally, this is my favorite one. I like to call this one random year generator, but it's basically a combination of blurting and active recall, which are other popular study techniques if you've heard of them. Anyway, random generator is basically you pick a random year. So for example, let's say 1865. And then you would list what happened in that year. So going with the 1865 example, we would say, oh, the Civil War ended, Abraham Lincoln got assassinated, the 13th Amendment got ratified, and Reconstruction started. After listing, similar to the mind maps, I like to use my notes and add anything I missed with a different color. I actually used this method on my real APUSH exam, so the real deal, and I used it during my LEQ. Thanks to this method, I was able to list the evidence that I was going to use for my LEQ and organize it well enough for it to work for my essay. It's great for knowing specific events, but it doesn't work as well with general terms. So what this means is, well, actually, we'll use an example. If I say 1848 is the year, then you might say, oh my god, Seneca Falls happened in 1848. But then you might also say, oh my god, the Underground Railroad was around in 1848. Now both of these are true, except Seneca Falls started and ended in 1848, so it's a bing bam boom event. And the Underground Railroad did exist in 1848, but unlike Seneca Falls, it doesn't have an exact start and end date. There are only estimates around in history, so these aren't like exact dates that can be listed in 1848. I've also found that random year generator works better in only 1 or maybe 2 year intervals if you're not doing just 1 year. Because a year is such a long period of time, there's so many events that can happen in 1 year, and then you have to list them all. And if you do a time period that's too big, it'll just be too much for you to remember. Because the point of random year generator is to remember the information in chunks, not to try and remember the entire course and spit it out in 5 minutes. Adding on to that, I found that random year generator is easier with the years covered in units 3 through 8 because, firstly, those units are the majority of the exam, but they also are the most densest, which means they have the most information compared to units 1, 2, and 9. And these are all of the study techniques that I used during my time in APUSH that helped me succeed. And like I mentioned earlier, all of this might not work for you. And that's okay, because everyone's different, and that just means you'll have to explore and figure out what works for you, not just in APUSH, but for your classes in general, whether it be chemistry, biology, English, etc. Now that's all for this video. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.